Putin is continuing to advance into Korea.
When did we beat Japan at anything?
To disperse with 30 bullets within half a second. 30 magazine clip in half a second.
Right now, if you Google the word idiot, a picture of Donald Trump comes up. I just did that.
We'll do it live. Fuck it.
All right, folks, welcome to this episode of the Political Circus Weekly Podcast. I'm obviously not your host, Mike. Mike's on a well-deserved vacation right now. So I am your temporary host, William Gadsden, from the Liberty Bites podcast. And, man, as usual, it is a political circus out there. Got a lot of interesting news to get to. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's start with, obviously, as usual, we have President Donald Trump in the news this week. So this news story comes to us from Politico. Trump disavows "Send Her Back" chant from his rally. All right, so this has been kind of an ongoing saga this week, right? So the quote-unquote squad, hashtag squad, made up of several freshman congresswomen, has been making headlines recently where, you know, they've made a lot of, depending on which point of view you're coming from, outrageous or at least edgy statements in Congress, on Twitter, social media, this sort of thing. And, you know, a lot of different things about whether it's the U.S. or Israel or, you know, a lot of identity politics getting thrown around. Well, I'm from this country or that country or this background. So because of that, Trump recently sent out a tweet talking about how some of these freshman congresswomen should be sent back to the countries they came from. And of course, you know, the entire Twitter sphere just exploded. Everybody's been up in arms about it. But if we take it from an objective perspective, which understandably is hard to do, but in the full the full tweet that he sent out, to be fair, he said that they need to be going back to the countries that they came from, that they're so proud of being from, et cetera, fixing them and coming back and bringing those lessons back to us. Now, obviously, I can't attribute exactly what President Trump meant in that tweet, but of course, there's plenty of people that are taking it one way or the other, but that is the full tweet. So anyway, more recently, there is a Trump rally in North Carolina, in which a lot of the Trump supporters were chanting "Send her back" in relation to, I believe it was Representative Omar, Elliot Omar in Congress. So at first, of course, everybody on the left was upset about it, but President Trump didn't say anything about it immediately afterwards. So this particular story is President Trump has sort of reversed his position on that, you know. So now he said that he's, quote, was not happy with the crowd at his campaign rally for chanting "Send her back" after he had goaded the North Carolina audience with a fiery attack on Representative Ilhan Omar. He said, quote, "I was not happy with it. I disagree with it. But again, I didn't say that. They did. But I disagree with it," unquote. So, man, I mean, this is kind of this might sting a little bit for Republicans, you know, folks that support him and expect him to have their back, et cetera, et cetera. But now he's kind of backpedaling a little bit and saying that, oh, well, I didn't say it. They said it. That's got to sting a little bit. So in addition to all of this, you've got Congress is trying to pass a resolution, and it's purely symbolic, but it does say a lot as far as how distasteful some of these comments, or at least how the perception of these comments has been. So they're trying to pass a resolution that will formally rebuke the president. But of course, you know, other than this particular instance, President Trump is continuing kind of this sort of all-out attack on these particular congresswomen. Now, another angle about this whole thing that a lot of people are overlooking, I think, is that these congresswomen have very low approval ratings in the country in general, lower than the already, I think it's like 11 or 12% approval rating of Congress in general. So there's obviously kind of the 4D chess argument from a lot of the Trump supporters saying that, oh, well, by putting them front and center, he's making them the face of the Democrat Party. And because they already have such low approval ratings, then, well, this is a good thing. It's going to be good for 2020, hashtag MAGA, 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 whatever. I don't know. Again, I can't attribute to the president that that's exactly what he's trying to do and that it's intentional, to kind of make them the face of the Democrat Party. I think the Democrat Party has been making identity politics the forefront of their campaign strategy for the last several years anyway. So I don't necessarily know how much Trump has had to do with this specifically. But it is interesting to consider that whether it's his doing or not, that is happening right now. So that's another interesting take from that. Moving on, we got another story. This one comes to us from MSNBC. And sorry, hang on, just had a pop up. Let me close that out. There we go. Judge denies Jeffrey Epstein bail in child sex trafficking case, citing danger to public. So this is a really interesting case for a lot of different reasons. Those of you that are maybe a little bit more conspiracy theory minded are absolutely drooling at the potential that this particular case holds. So what I mean by that, well, let's go through the broad strokes here, right? So Jeffrey Epstein, he's a billionaire investor, very well known and pun intended, intimately close with a lot of people on the left, especially Bill Clinton. But he has also traditionally, historically, been very close with Donald Trump as well. So there have always been kind of these rumors floating around of him owning a private island that's filled with children that he gets from child sex trafficking, and he's a pedophile, and he will fly his friends on his public jet called the Lolita Express out to this private island for God knows what kind of debauchery and obviously criminal acts. So the fact that these sorts of rumors have been floating around for years and he's getting tried for it is really interesting. So a lot of the conspiracy minded folks might say is that, like, this is it, the whole thing's going to unravel. Once they take down Epstein, all of the pedophiles that are throughout our government are going to be taken down, and man, like, this is going to be this new thing. I'm really skeptical about that idea. And this is to assume that something like that is even happening on a massive scale within the government. Even if it was, I think we can all understand and agree that people that are currently in the government are so powerful and so wealthy and so well connected that even if Jeffrey Epstein is convicted of the allegations and the charges that are brought against him right now, I don't think it will cause any sort of domino effect. I think if anything, everyone's going to kind of hole up and clam up if they are guilty, or even if they aren't guilty, but they're associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm not super confident that anything like that is going to happen, but this is a very interesting case to watch, to follow, because he has publicly been associated with folks like Bill Clinton and, of course, President Donald Trump for so many years. So key points here: a federal judge denied bail to wealthy investor Jeffrey Epstein, citing the potential danger he poses to the public and the risk that Epstein will flee to avoid prosecution for child sex trafficking charges. So again, I mean, this guy is so wealthy and so powerful that, if he was given bail, then that's a flight risk for sure. I mean, he could just disappear somewhere. Epstein, 66, was asking a judge to release him on a bond of as high as $100 million or more, which, as a billionaire, I mean, it's not a big deal for him, with conditions that would include requiring him to remain in his New York City mansion with round-the-clock security monitoring and an electric trafficking device. Epstein, a former friend of Presidents Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, was arrested July 6th after a federal grand jury indicted him on a charge of sex trafficking and one count of conspiring to commit sex trafficking. So definitely something to keep out for. I mean, even calling the bail proposal, the judge calls it, quote, irretrievably inadequate. I can only assume that that's based on not only the charges that are brought against him, but also the sheer amount of money that this guy has. Like, it would be a drop in the bucket for him. So the judge noted that the two women who claimed they were abused by Epstein gave, quote, compelling testimony at a court hearing Monday where they had expressed, quote, fear for their safety. So under those two particular points, the judge decided to deny bail. So another point as far as the flight risk is concerned is that there's also an expired passport that was seized from Epstein, and it has Epstein's photo but a different name on it, as well as a stated residence in Saudi Arabia, which is interesting. It was used in the 1980s for travel, according to prosecutors. So yeah, I mean, this guy's clearly a flight risk. I think that's a good call on the judge's part. Not to mention, again, with the amount of money, the connections this guy has, like, I mean, it's questionable how this case may even go. I mean, like, considering the corruption in the U.S. government and even the judicial branch, it's definitely a story to keep an eye on. I certainly will be, and it's going to be interesting to see how all that turns out. So let's move on to the next story here. This one comes to us from Breitbart. Report, viral FaceApp now owns rights to 150 million users' faces and names. So a few days ago, this week, I'm sure a lot of you have been seeing your friends post the FaceApp, pictures from the FaceApp, particularly where you can take a selfie and make yourself look super, super old. I did it with one of the shots from the studio where I filmed Liberty Bites, and it's pretty freaking creepy. I look kind of like Boehner, which is terrifying on a number of different levels. But anyway, so it turns out, and this is only a few days after the app went viral, it's owned by a Russian company, and within the agreement that you, I guess, passively sign onto when you download the app, you are giving FaceApp a license to use your data in perpetuity. So the data that you give them access to. So your pictures specifically, pictures and names. So this is from the terms of service. You grant FaceApp a perpetual, irrevocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide, fully paid, transferable, sub-licensable license to use, reproduce, modify, adapt, publish, translate, create derivative works from, distribute, publicly perform, and display your user content in any name, username, or likeness provided in connection with your user content in all media formats and channels now known or later developed without compensation to you. When you post or otherwise share user content on or through our services, you understand that your user content and any associated information such as your username, location, or profile photo will be visible to the public. So what does all of that mean? There's a lot of kind of law language going on there. Basically, whatever information that you gave them access to, they can do anything with. They fully own that. If they want to use it for advertisements, if they want to sell it to somebody else, which is probably the most likely outcome for that, they're going to sell it to other companies that mine that sort of data and use it for targeted ads like Facebook, like Google. So basically that's what kind of came about with this. I mean, like it went viral. Everybody it's the new thing. It's trendy. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I guess we just gave up all this information to this foreign company. Now, one interesting parallel that a lot of folks might not be drawing here is, like I mentioned, a lot of this information is already gathered in a similar manner by Facebook by Google. So, I mean, it's not like your information isn't already out there, but I don't think that justifies more companies taking that information and doing with it what they want. And, you're just giving them carte blanche because you've already done it with a few other companies. I think, if anything, this is more indicative of how careful we need to be with how we transfer our information, knowingly or unknowingly. So by law, the terms of service are out there. But I mean, I did the same thing. I didn't read them. I was just like, oh yeah, this is fun. Download it and do with it what you will without understanding the consequences of it. So I think, if anything, a conclusion that we should be drawing from this is that, man, I mean, this is happening. Your data is actively being mined and being used for whatever it is that company wants, and there is nothing you can legally do about it. There is no legal recourse for you. So this is absolutely something that we need to be keeping in mind moving forward, especially as technology develops. In this particular case with the FaceApp, at least in my case, the joke's on them because I have like 2 selfies and like 200 memes in my albums. So, I mean, they can do with that what they want. All right, moving on. This comes to us from CBS Sacramento, Channel 13. Gendered language like manhole will soon be banned from Berkeley's city codes. So I've got a few things to say about this because it's just hilarious. But before we get to that point, I laugh so I don't cry. But before we get to that point, let's get into some details here. So basically, the city got together, the city council, the different committees within the city council got together and said, hey, we're going to vote on banning certain words that the city government uses, the local government uses. So things like manhole, manpower, things like that will be changed to maintenance hole and human effort. So Berkeley City Council member Rigel Robinson, who's the bill's primary author, said, quote, "There's power in language. This is a small move, but it matters. Having a male-centric municipal code is inaccurate and not reflective of our reality. Women and non-binary individuals are just as entitled to accurate representation. Our laws are for everyone, and our municipal code should reflect that." Okay, so pretty short article, but there's a lot to talk about within this one article. Okay, so my head tells me that this is ridiculous, it's stupid, who cares? But my heart reminds me that as silly as it may be, and I do think it is silly, we have to keep in mind that the way that our government is built, it is made with federalism in mind. So federalism, I mean, is the overall concept, not as federalism versus anti-federalism. But federalism is a concept meaning that there are different levels of government that are to cooperate together while also existing independently from one another. So you have the federal government, state government, and of course the local government. And all of them are supposed to, as I said, operate independently with one another or from one another while also collaborating with one another. So there's a phrase, the laboratories of democracy, which was popularized by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. And basically what he means by this, he says, a state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel social and economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country. So he says states in the particular quote, but I think this applies just as equally to local government. So if the city of Berkeley, they just decide that calling manholes maintenance holes or whatever, if that is something that is so important to them that they're willing to take legislative action to change the municipal codes in that regard, that's on them. You know, that is their business. I think we can all continue, and we will continue to laugh and make fun of them because seriously, I think there are a lot bigger issues going on in the world right now. But you know, that's their prerogative when it comes down to it. I do think it's interesting that, you have one of the Berkeley City Council individuals coming out and saying that, well, our laws are for everyone and our municipal court should reflect that. There's power in language. This is a small move, but it matters. Does it matter? Does it matter? I mean, this is where I split from it. I do agree with the concept of laboratories of democracy, and it is their prerogative. I would question, however, if there are not more important issues that need to be addressed that would be in the city council's purview. Homelessness, for example, the local government debt, taxes. How are you going to handle all of these different things? But instead, you're concerned about municipal code being gendered and changing that gendered language. So that's pretty much all I've got where that is concerned. I will include that California as a state does rank number 1 in poverty in the U.S. So I think maybe the Berkeley City Council can be addressing some more important things. Moving on to the next story. This comes to us from the Wall Street Journal. Trump says U.S. ship shot down Iranian drone in Strait of Hormuz. So this is interesting because, of course, most of you will remember the kerfuffle we had a while back with Iran supposedly attacking different merchant ships in the Gulf. And, of course, there was going to be the airstrike that Trump called off 10 minutes beforehand, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of folks, especially in libertarian circles, were saying, okay, well, this is just like any number of the other false flag attacks that we've seen throughout history that was used as a fulcrum for starting another war with somebody. So after he called off the airstrike, after Donald Trump called off the airstrike, it kind of died down. It was like, okay, well, I guess they gave up on it, but it turns out that's not the case. So Iranian forces said Thursday they had seized a foreign tanker temporarily pushing oil prices up on fears that Tehran could further disrupt shipping traffic on a vital waterway for crude. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps took possession of a small vessel carrying what was said to have been carrying 1 million liters of smuggled fuel near the island of Larak in the Persian Gulf. On Sunday, according to a press release quoted by Iran's state news agency, IRNA. So anyway, basically all these different small events have been popping up here and there. They'll seize an oil tanker. We will send over a drone. They shoot down the drone. All of these different things going on. So now you have President Trump claiming that a U.S. Navy ship has shot down an Iranian drone, which of course is certainly less of an escalation than what we would have potentially seen if we had went ahead and gone ahead with those airstrikes that was being discussed. So the Iranian government has come out and said, no, we do not have any sort of record of a drone being shot down. But, this is going to be kind of a constant back and forth. This is one of the interesting things with international relations now, especially where the individuals of the citizens the citizens of the countries involved are concerned. A little tongue twister there. I just woke up. I haven't had my coffee yet, which is a mistake on my part. Anyway, so nowadays, it used to be that you could trust your government to a certain extent. You could trust the newspapers to a certain extent. There were checks and balances in place for that. Even especially where the media is concerned, they wouldn't work in close relation to one particular party or another within the government. In many cases, they would actually be working against the government. If the government was working to cover something up that journalists felt like the people should know, then they would be the ones to uncover it, sometimes to the detriment of the government itself. But that's not the case anymore, right? We don't know what media outlets we can trust. A lot of people are becoming more and more suspicious of their own government. What's the government actually doing? What are the goals? Why are they acting in this manner or that manner? So this is another one of those cases. You've got the U.S. government saying they shot down a drone. an Iranian drone. You've got the Iranian government saying that they didn't shoot down a drone, and this is after you've already had multiple tanker attacks, tanker captures. The Iranian government shot down a U.S. drone that was confirmed. So it seems like this is coming back into the headlines. So on top of this, another interesting story that isn't from the Wall Street Journal. I don't recall where I pulled that up from. Oh, okay. There it is. It's from the Sun. U.S. to deploy 500 troops to expanding Saudi Arabian air base to front up to Iran threat. So all of these small actions are happening at once, but all of these small actions can combine to escalating tensions with Iran even further than they are right now. So one interesting angle with Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia is concerned in us adding troops to this air base, is that basically within the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia are the main power players in the region. And both of them want to control the Middle East by themselves. They don't want anybody horning in on their action. Now, obviously, they're not going to be outright expansionist about it. They're not going to be trying to actively take land in the Middle East. Instead, they want to control the Middle East by proxy. So they'll be funding, for example, Saudi Arabia is funding one side of the Yemeni civil war. Iran is funding the other side of the Yemeni civil war. Saudi Arabia is actively sending in military advisors and contributing airstrikes, all of these different things. And that is just one example of how there's sort of this proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia for control of the Middle East. Obviously, that's a little bit more outright and bloody than a lot of the other actions that are taking place. I mean, you've got trade negotiations between the two countries and smaller countries, all these sort of alliances and diplomacy going on. So for us to be involved, not only in a malicious way with Iran, but a beneficial way with Saudi Arabia, it's clearly showing not only those two main countries, but also a lot of the smaller countries within the Middle East that we are taking a side. And I think that's a very, very dangerous angle to take, especially when we're already involved in so many foreign wars that don't have any end. We're committing troops, we're committing trillions of taxpayer dollars to these wars. Why do we need another one? Why do we need to get involved in something like this again? Now, I think obviously this is a clear-cut case where our quote-unquote interests are involved because it comes down to oil. I mean, honestly, it does, especially when you're looking at the geography of the region with the Strait of Hormuz, which is controlled by Iran. That is where the majority of the world's crude oil is shipped through. So if Iran suddenly decided that it wanted to cut off that strait, then that would be a huge strategic move on their part, because now you're blocking off the majority of the world's crude oil. And you're saying that we as a country are going to control this, and we're going to essentially hold the oil supply for the rest of the world hostage. That would absolutely spark a war. So I think all of these small events are stacking up to that. But the funny thing about this is that while I do think it is primarily about oil at this point, didn't America just recently become oil independent? Like, aren't we now one of the largest producers in the world for oil? So why do we, why are we spending so much attention and energy and money and troops to this cause when it's clearly a regional conflict? It's a regional issue that we don't need to be involved in. That about wraps it up for our news roundup for this week. Please send me a comment or a message. You can find me on William Gadsden on Facebook, William Gadsden Political Commentator. I'm at William_Gadsden on Twitter. So send me some comments, some feedback. Let me know any news stories that I missed that you're interested in, and I'll send you some hot takes on it. But in the meantime, if you would like to continue to support the content that we're producing, please go to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/thinklibерtypatrons and, give us whatever you feel like. Of course, we got some really sweet deals and rewards on our Patreon if you're interested. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll come back next week.
Thing sucks.